Every professional athlete fears a certain moment. Not the poor performance, not the losing streak, but the subtle nagging anxiety that today might be the day that someone decides you're no longer good enough. That feeling wasn't sporadic for Lexie Hull. It wasn't a difficult week or period. For 2 years, it happened every single night. And no one outside that locker room for the Indiana Fever knew how awful it really was. That's what sets her story apart from all the others that have emerged from the WNBA's most volatile, captivating, and combustible period. Because Lexie Hull was quietly going through one of the most amazing personal transformations in women's basketball history, while everyone else watched Caitlyn Clark break records and sell out venues throughout the nation. From a guy who was about to lose everything to one of the league's most genuinely captivating characters. If you appreciate this content, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 85% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free and only takes a second, but it means the world to us. So, did you subscribe already? Great. Thank you so much for your support. Now, back to the video. And people were shocked by what she revealed when she eventually made the decision to openly discuss what that experience was like from the inside out. But you had to know exactly where Lexie Hull came from before any of it made sense. On paper, the 2022 WNBA draft appeared to be a dream. 6th overall choice, Stanford alumnus, national champion, 3 All-Pac, 12 honors, and recipient of the Elite 90 award for the greatest level of academic and athletic success. Lexie Hull was the kind of talent that teams build around in every quantifiable way. The type of candidate who shows up with credentials that are so spotless they virtually glow. What she was entering was not captured by the draft night cameras. In 2022, the Indiana Fever were a poor basketball team. By most accounts, they were among the league's poorest teams. Losing seasons, missing out on the playoffs, and a culture that has been having years of difficulty establishing itself. There may not be a more difficult atmosphere for a young athlete attempting to make a name for herself in a professional league than one where the squad around you was also struggling to survive. It feels like an audition every time you play. Every wasted opportunity feels like proof. Every change bears the potential consequences for your future. During her first 2 seasons, Hull averaged fewer than 5 points each game. Take a moment to read that again. A basketball player from Stanford who was a top 10 draft pick and had won a national championship was averaging less than 5 points per game. Even though she was playing more than 20 minutes a night in her second season, she was still unable to regularly score more than 4 or 6 points. The figures weren't merely depressing. These were the kinds of figures that put a stop to careers before they truly start. However, the figures only provided a portion of the picture. What was going on inside Lexie Hull's head was the part that no one outside that building could see. Seldom do athletes discuss fear openly. That kind of sensitivity is discouraged in professional sports due to a culture of toughness, particularly for athletes who are still trying to fit in. In contrast to most athlete confessionals, Hull's account of those early years in an interview with Glamour magazine ended differently. She talked of times when the terror of missing a shot extended beyond basketball. It has to do with surviving. She actually worried that she may be completely cut from the roster due to a single poor play on the floor, a lost chance, or a poor read at a critical juncture. Lying awake at night, a Stanford graduate with a top 10 draft pedigree feared that one missed jumper may kill her career. In the abstract sense, that wasn't anxiousness. That was the true psychological burden of being a member of a losing team with no margin for error and no safety net. She talked about how nerve-wracking those early years were outside of the court. A player's mental state is affected in a certain way by losing cultures. Every error is amplified when there is no playoff run to give the season purpose and no victory to ease the difficult times. Even though the situation isn't objectively high, the stakes seem to be. Furthermore, that setting was subtly harmful in ways that no one observing from the outside could really comprehend for someone who was already wondering if she really fit at this level. Her admission was notable not only for its honesty but also for its clarity. She knew exactly what had been going on with her. She was able to identify it. In real time during live games, she was able to describe how the pressure had affected her breathing, movement patterns, mechanics, and decision-making. It's difficult to have that kind of self-awareness, and it's important because it's precisely what enabled her to react the way she did when everything around her abruptly and drastically changed. Music. Caitlyn Clark was chosen by the Indiana Fever with the first overall pick in the WNBA draft in April 2024. Here's a brief recap of what that moment meant. Music. Clark was the most prolific scorer in NCAA basketball history, both men's and women's. During her 4 years at Iowa, she transformed Big Ten women's basketball into a respectable national television event. Records that had stood for decades had been broken by her. In cities where women's collegiate basketball had never been played, she had sold out arenas. She had turned the Iowa Hawkeyes into one of the nation's most popular collegiate sports teams. And there was a straightforward but significant question surrounding her entry into the WNBA. Was it all a college bubble that would burst the moment she entered a professional game, or was any of this real? The response was clear and arrived quickly. In terms of rookie performance, broadcast viewership, and fan interaction, Clark broke WNBA records in ways that made the earlier milestones seem virtually insignificant. Overnight, the Indiana Fever transformed from one of the league's forgotten teams to the most talked about, contentious, and widely reported team in women's sports. The team was followed everywhere they went by a media presence, sellout crowds, and national broadcasts. The league as a whole noticed that the Fever had turned into a must-watch show. For the players who were already there, however, what mattered most was what transpired inside the lines. Additionally, for Lexie Hull, Clark's contributions on the court were entirely overlooked by the majority of casual observers. There is a particular type of player who, without necessarily controlling the box score themselves, transforms the game for everyone around them. Although Clark is undoubtedly a top scorer, her most underappreciated trait, at least in the eyes of those who play alongside her, is something that is harder to quantify. It's her ability to read a defense several steps ahead of the actual play. Her natural ability to attract defensive attention and create opportunities for teammates that appear practically before the defense can react to them. For Lexie Hull, that meant open looks and actual, uncontested perimeter opportunities that weren't the result of a botched play or a fortunate rotation, something she hadn't encountered in 2 complete professional seasons. She was making the kinds of shots she had been practicing for years, the ones she knew how to make but had been too distracted to do on a regular basis during games. And the outcomes were striking and instantaneous. In 2024, Hull had a 47.1% three-point shooting percentage. That was one of the best individual shooting performances in the league that season, not just a lifetime high. For comparison, she had a three-point shooting percentage of about 36 or 37% while attending Stanford. With the psychological burden of a failing culture bearing down on every shot she made, she had gone back to that number and then completely surpassed it as soon as she stopped playing. She used almost disarmingly straightforward language to explain the change. She was aware of the impending open gunfire. She was aware that the effort she had made was genuine. Rather than clinging to each try as if it were her last, she allowed herself to accept the result. No film session or shooting coach can provide you with that level of mental freedom. It stems from having faith in the system, in your teammates, and ultimately in yourself. She had received the first 2 from Clark. Ho had discovered the third by herself. However, the court was just one aspect of the transformation. Something as surprising was emerging off it. There were sincere worries about Clark's fit in a locker room full of players who had already spent years forming bonds and a sense of team identity when she was drafted. She was the most well-known athlete in the sport, the face of a franchise makeover, and the focus of more media coverage than any WNBA player in recent memory. She had played with teammates from her childhood for 4 years at Iowa. Gabby Marshall, Kate Martin, and other musicians who were acquainted with her before to all of this, including the recordings, the national attention, and the unachievable pressure of expectations. Indiana was unique. These were professionals with their own adventures, professions, and complex emotions regarding the significance of this event for both the league and themselves. In certain quarters, the concern was genuine. Would she be welcomed by the established players? Would the difference in focus lead to conflict? Would that much weight be too much for the locker room to support? The reality was quite different from what anyone had anticipated, and it all began with Lexie Hull. Almost instantly, the two clicked. In the sincere, slightly chaotic manner that true friendships truly develop, not in a polished, PR-managed manner that is. Meticulously constructed for media consumption. They were experimenting with beverages, filming video for TikTok, and hanging out off the court in Indianapolis. When the WNBA sent players to Mexico during the Olympic break, it was evident to everyone that the two were inseparable. This link wasn't made. It was authentic. The dynamic had developed into something with its own name and identity, music. In WNBA culture by the time the 2025 season drew near. After Sophie Cunningham was traded to Indiana during the off-season, Clark, Hull, and Cunningham started referring to themselves as the Tracelocks. The three developed into one of the league's most enjoyable and really endearing presences. At an LPGA Pro Am, they caddied together. On social media, they continuously made fun of one another. Clark could need more sun exposure, Hull told People magazine, making a series of Fever Media Day pictures into one of the league's most hilarious off-season moments in years. Hull even shared a photo on Instagram with the remark, "We are so back," making fun of Clark's well-known fair skin in a way that only works when both parties are totally at ease with one another. It was the kind of camaraderie that provided viewers with something uncommon in professional sports, an authentic glimpse into the players' true selves when the cameras aren't being properly controlled. Hull then verified what many had already assumed. Interviewers were informed that Clark would attend her nuptials. That wasn't a light-hearted remark. Will Matson, a former Stanford baseball player who was chosen in the 6th round of the 1919 MLB draft until a string of ailments caused him to retire from the game, and Hull became engaged in April 2025. After Hull was drafted and moved to Indianapolis, Matson moved there to be with her. The two had met at Stanford. He abandoned his baseball career, centered his life on hers, and now found himself in the epicenter of one of her most significant life events. Caitlyn Clark was also scheduled to attend. It's not a public relations story. That one is genuine. But as all of this was going on, Hull was silently getting ready to say something that would cut through every upbeat article and strategically placed Instagram picture. She was preparing to be honest in a way that would have been completely avoided by most players in her situation. There were high expectations for the 2025 WNBA season. At the end of her debut season, Clark was the most influential rookie in league history. And going into year 2, Hull had said that there was no denying the difference in her. Clark's presence had a seriousness about it that had never been before. A focus and sharpness that made it clear to everyone around her that she had finished adjusting and was prepared to take charge. Before the season began, Hull told reporters that it was clear Clark had come prepared to do business. Everyone in her immediate vicinity sensed it. By all standards, Hull was the team's best player through the first 7 games of 2025. With a three-point shooting percentage of more than 55%, she was leading the entire WNBA. She was scoring over 10 points every game on average. The Fever appeared to be a club that had advanced, a truly unified group with genuine championship potential. Then the wounds began. First, Clark's quad, then her growth, and finally a soft tissue problem that left her unconscious for a while. She had experienced 4 distinct physical setbacks in a matter of months by July 15th. This one occurred during a Connecticut Sun game. That night's photo was among the most spectacular of the season. After giving it her all, Clark got up from the floor and sat on the bench, covering her face with a towel. Her forehead was leaning against the structure of the basket. She appeared to be using all of her strength to keep herself together. Lexie Hull was seated next beside her, simply sitting there without saying anything. Hull later discussed that time with an openness that was obviously intentional. She described Clark experiencing the kind of frustration that only arises when your body refuses to comply with the demands of your mind and work ethic. It wasn't a lack of effort that caused the physical decline. It was in spite of a nearly superhuman quantity of it. Hull was well aware of the significance of that divergence. Despite missing Clark for extended periods of time, the Fever persevered and advanced to the WNBA semifinals. Before Indiana's journey came to an end, they led the eventual champion Las Vegas Aces to a Game 5 that required overtime. Hull didn't make a standout contribution to that run. Every night, she had to defend the top perimeter scorer on the other team. When everything else is going wrong, she was making the kind of two-way plays that kept games tight. She was carrying the emotional burden of witnessing her closest teammate go through one of the most trying times in her career while being the player her team needed rather than the player the cameras were most interested in. All of that was leading up to a moment that Hull had obviously been considering for some time. Hull was featured alongside some of the most well-known figures in entertainment and sports in Glamour magazine's Women of the Year article in October 2025. For a player who had quietly emerged over the previous 2 seasons as one of the league's most respected presences, it was a noteworthy acknowledgement. The majority of respondents anticipated that the interview would be the kind of nice, professional, and athlete-friendly material that those qualities typically generate. A brief history, some reflections on the season, and perhaps a quotation on growth and friendship. In reality, something quite different took place. Hull made statements on that platform that the majority of players in her position would never make in public. She gave the envy a direct name. She said that there was genuine animosity from other parts of the league due to the Indiana Fever's media attention, the cameras, the sponsorship agreements, the national broadcasts, and the total overhaul of the team's image. She stated unequivocally that jealousy over the Fever's transformation due to Caitlyn Clark's presence existed, and it wasn't limited to fans or media pundits. It originated from other locker rooms. She continued after that. She claimed that the Fever had heard it directly, not through rumors or outside conjecture. They had overheard opposition teams and players openly stating that they could not let Indiana win in the locker rooms. That the bullseye on the Fever's backs wasn't symbolic. The competitors were speaking it aloud, and it was intentional and literal. Consider the practical implications of that. Opponents consider every game the Indiana Fever plays as though it has implications for the playoffs. There is a level of intensity in every individual game against Clark and her colleagues that surpasses that of typical regular season play. Every time Indiana takes the floor, the referees are scrutinized. People who have probably never watched a professional basketball game in their lives record, examine, debate, and utilize every call, no call, and contact moment as ammunition. And every player on the Fever roster spends every night of the season in that setting. By the time of the interview, Lexie Hull had been residing there for 2 years. From the inside of the most closely followed team in women's sports, she had witnessed it firsthand and in real time. Music. She had sensed it in the floor-based body language of opponents. Those who were playing against her had told her about it. Furthermore, she did not present it as a grievance, a complaint, or an appeal for compassion when she chose to discuss it. She said, "Fine. Use it. If the extra motivation other teams feel when they play Indiana makes them come in harder and more prepared, then good. Everyone deserves to face the best version of their opponents." The Fever believe they get that every night. And Hull's attitude toward it was essentially, bring it. Music. Her response to being the target wasn't to resent the pressure or deflect from the reality of it. It was to treat it as a baseline condition of competing at the level she had chosen to compete at. That is not a small thing. That is a genuinely rare quality in professional athletes, especially ones who've had every reason to feel aggrieved by the circumstances around them. It was the most honest thing anyone connected to the Indiana Fever had said publicly about what it actually costs to be part of Caitlyn Clark's world, and it landed because it came from someone who had earned the credibility to say it. When you step back and look at the full arc of what Lexie Hull has been through, the picture that emerges is something worth sitting with for a moment. She entered the professional game as a genuinely gifted player on a franchise that was quietly falling apart. She spent 2 years fighting to hold a roster spot, averaging numbers that didn't reflect her ability, and surviving in a psychological environment that was slowly dismantling whatever confidence she had arrived with. She was scared. She was struggling, and almost nobody outside those walls knew how bad it had gotten. Then the most disruptive force women's basketball had ever seen walked into the building and changed every variable simultaneously. The team's culture shifted. The franchise's profile exploded. Hull's own game was freed from the mental prison it had been locked in. She shot 47% from 3. She became a legitimate two-way contributor on a team that went from lottery-bound to semifinal contention. She formed one of the most genuine, visible friendships in the league. She became a household name in WNBA circles, not through marketing or personal branding, but through the unmanufactured combination of real performance and real personality. And she did it while being completely honest about what all of it actually looked like from the inside. The fear in those early years. The freedom that came with having a playmaker of Clark's caliber beside her. The emotional weight of watching a close friend battle her own body through injury after injury. The reality of playing on a team that every opponent treats as a personal enemy. She talked about all of it. Not in the carefully managed way that PR teams design athlete interviews to be, but in the direct, clear, human way that actually resonates with people who are paying attention. That's what separates her story from the dozens of other peripheral narratives that orbit Caitlyn Clark's career. This isn't a story about proximity to fame. It's a story about what someone does with that proximity, whether they shrink from it or grow into it, whether they disappear into the background noise or find their own voice inside the chaos. Lexie Hull found hers. And the fact that she found it in one of the loudest, most intense environments women's sports has ever produced makes it considerably more interesting than it would have been under any quieter circumstances. Now the question is, what comes next? Hull entered the 2025 off-season as a restricted free agent for the first time in her professional career. That is a different kind of uncertainty than anything she has faced before. In her early years, the question was whether she would make the team. Now the question is whether the team she has helped build into something real will find a way to keep her. The Fever have the right to match any offer she receives from another franchise, and given what she contributed in 2025, the expectation across the league is that Indiana will do whatever it takes to retain her. But professional sports are rarely as simple as what the logic of the situation suggests. The WNBA's collective bargaining landscape is complicated in ways that create uncertainty for everyone involved. And Hull herself admitted she couldn't fully predict how everything would shake out. What she could speak to clearly was what Indianapolis had come to mean to her. Her fiancé relocated his entire life there. She has built connections in that city that go well beyond a basketball contract. The Fever fanbase, which had grown alongside the team's transformation over the past 2 seasons, had become something she openly expressed affection for. None of that guarantees anything. It rarely does in this business. What it does guarantee is that wherever Lexie Hull plays next, she carries something with her that cannot be contracted or negotiated away. She knows exactly who she is as a player and as a person in a way she absolutely did not when she walked into that building as a scared 6th overall pick in 2022. She knows what she is capable of when the environment around her matches her talent. She knows how to be a genuine teammate rather than a performative one. She knows how to be honest about hard things in public without making it about herself. And she knows, maybe more clearly than most people who have been in her situation, what it actually feels like to go from the edge of being forgotten to the center of the most talked about story in women's basketball. That kind of knowledge is rare. And the way she has chosen to use it, generously, honestly, and without the protective veneer most athletes build around their most vulnerable truths, is what makes Lexie Hull worth paying attention to long after the Caitlyn Clark story has moved on to its next chapter. Because this was never really about the shadow. It was about what she built in spite of it. And she is just getting started.